Welcome to Book Talk Tuesdays. I'm your host, Madrian Lowe. This is a new thing I'm doing on my channel. I'm an attorney and also an avid reader. I love reading historical fiction. I love reading nonfiction works and also love reading biography works. So here on this page, I'll be talking about those types of books on Tuesdays, trying to get my thoughts out to you in about 10 minutes, definitely under 20 minutes, but we'll aim for 10 minutes or less every Tuesday to try to give you some thoughts about some things I'm reading and things I hope you may enjoy as well. Let's get to the video. So if you don't know who Toni Morrison is, I guess you may be living under a rock, but Toni Morrison, this year is actually would have been her 100th year of life. So all across the country, book clubs are doing celebrations and commemorations of Toni's. I think the Lorraine, Ohio book club is currently reading her novel Jazz, and I think they have a meeting in a few days actually. So if you're reading Jazz or read it recently, go ahead and check that out. But today we'll be talking about Sula. So Sula is a story of two women, Nell and Sula, who live in a small town in Ohio, and they have two very divergent paths of womanhood. They grow up together. They was girls together, as Nell says in the book. The synopsis on the back of the book says that Nell Wright has chosen to stay in the place where she was born, to marry, raise a family, and become a pillar in the Black community. Sula Peace has rejected the life Nell has embraced, escaping to college and submerging herself in her city life. When she returns to her roots, it is as a rebel and a wanton seductress. Eventually, both women must face the consequences of their choices. Together, they create an unforgettable portrait of what it means and costs to be a Black woman in America.
I suppose the Blue Sky was about one's dependency on the world for identification, self-value, feelings of worth, whereas I wanted to explore something quite the opposite in Sula, where you have a woman who is whimsical, who depends on her own instincts. And both exaggerations I find deplorable, but my way is to push everything out to the edge to see if what it is really made, so that Sula would be, quote, a free woman. There's a lot of danger in that, because you don't have commitments and you don't feel that connection. I think freedom ideally is being able to choose your responsibilities. Not having any responsibilities, but being able to choose which things you want to be responsible for. And so she is paired with a friend, Nell, who is the salt of the earth, who takes on the responsibilities of her children and whatever, as opposed to her very close friend who has none, accepts none, and really and truly operates out of whim, and whatever mood strikes her. Evil was mean. Sula even said so. There was no good reason for her to speak so. Feeble-minded or not, old, whatever, even knew what she was doing, always had. She'd stayed away from Sula's funeral and accused Nell of drowning Chicken Little for spite.
Sula. This book took me a lot to get through and a long time to read. I think this is one of those readings for me where I picked up and put Sula down a lot of times. I know people have a hard time getting through Toni Morrison's books. I hadn't really had that problem. I was able to read The Bluest Eye with ease. I read Beloved with ease. I read A Mercy with ease. Sula was one that I picked up and put down. And when I finally did get in the thick of it and started reading it, read it literally in 2 days. And I understand why this is a quintessential text now. There's so many good things in this book. I wrote down a lot of quotes that stuck with me, but I think the one thing I thought about as I was reading this book is how familiar Sula felt as a character. And that's because she reminded me so much of Mrs. Janie in Their Eyes Are Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. Janie and like the lady said on that meme, and they were sisters. Sula and Janie, and they were sisters because they are the same type of women who were unwilling to circumvent the idea they had for their life, to fit the mold of what society said their life should look like. Sula Peace didn't bring nobody no peace, but she was a woman committed to self. And I thought that was such a beautiful thing to read and experience and see, especially considering like the women of these time periods, the women of the 1920s and 1930s didn't have the autonomy of choice. And I thought the way that Toni framed Sula's grandmother, Eva, and her mother, Hannah, as these women who loved men so much that they forgot themselves. There's a quote in reference to Eva where Toni says, "But she argued with them with such absence of bile, such a concentration of man love that they felt their convictions solidified by her disagreement," at page 42. And that really did kind of set up for me the idea and the understanding of why Sula rejected the notions of traditional society so much. This idea that in order for her to become someone else, she had to surrender her idea and her understanding of what life meant and looked like for her. And this comes to a head too, I think, at the end of the book on Sula's deathbed, when Nell comes to visit her, and Nell is basically scorning her in the same way that other women have for her inability to keep a man or inability to have a man. And Sula says, "My lonely is mine. Your lonely is made by somebody else and handed to you." You know what I mean? And it was kind of like, damn, Sula, because you're saying this to your best friend in the time period, all considering what you did to your best friend. Right? So I didn't want to spoil it, but this is a spoiler if you haven't read Sula yet. But Sula sleeps with Nell's husband after she comes back into town. Right? So Sula and Nell, the last time that Sula sees Nell is at her wedding day. Sula is the bridesmaid. She said that she wanted to be the bridesmaid, not a bridesmaid, the bridesmaid in her wedding. And she helped her meticulously plan and get ready for the day. And, you know, I think that Nell was happy enough. And Sula comes home. And I also say that Sula reminded me so much of Janie, because there's a part in there as a watching guide where like the way that the city and the town folks treat Janie is as if she moves in the same way that a man moves in the community, right? Especially after her husband dies, because she doesn't allow, you know, she owns her own store. She takes like her control of her own life in the same way that Sula does. Sula, you know, when she comes home and is talking with her grandmother, the first thing she does when she gets home is puts her grandmother in a retirement home, an old folks home. And she also starts shit with her grandmother. And she's like, she tells, "Anything burning up in me is mine." She's going back and forth at it with her grandmother. And she says to her, "Don't talk to me about no burning. You watch your own mama, you crazy roach. You the one you should have been burnt. But I ain't got that. I ain't any fires in this house. I'm lighting them. Hellfire don't need no lighting. It's already burning in you." And Sula says in reply to that, "Whatever burning in me is mine." Like a woman of her own control and own convictions. And I also thought about the way that Toni plays with memory. In all of Toni's stories, there's this essence or underlying theme of memory. There's often a long period of time between the characters and when they last saw each other, and then like the next time they meet. And recitative, the characters go years, the women go years without talking to each other and run into each other again on certain instances and have like these moments where they reconcile or where they fall apart. In Beloved, Paul D and Setha go years without seeing each other before they find each other again after Setha has escaped with her children to Baby Suge's house. And there's all these gaps, and Toni plays with memory a lot. And it made me think about kind of the quote at the end of the book where Shadrach is the way that he remembers Sula and remembers the incident has a completely separate and distinct memory for Sula and for Nell. Even for Eva at the end of the book, when Eva is kind of talking to Nell rather, about what happened to Chicken Little and Sula throwing Chicken Little in the water. She's talking to Nell but calls her Sula and is talking to her as if they were one. And also just that does a good job of showing one, like the way that Toni weaves memory throughout the story, but also showing how inseparable the two were and how they had allowed life to get in the way of their relationship. You know, there was a lot of things I felt like I didn't understand how Sula could be so caught up. I guess she didn't really have a serious understanding of love, because the way that Toni writes it is that when she says that, you know, the most substantive relationship we know about in Sula's life is that of hers and Ajax, and she calls that possession, not love. She says that she comes to new possession under Ajax, and right when that happened, Ajax decided to leave her. And so I couldn't wrap my head around the idea of Sula not understanding the way in which, or even how much she really should care about the pain that she caused Nell for sleeping with her husband. But the women who wrote these types of novels, and the women in general, I think they do a great job of taking us to that time period and really like telling that story. Because whenever I read stories from like the early 1920s and 30s, the men who leave their wives and cheat on their wives are always the same type of men. They always are men who are looking for validation of their manhood from their wives, and that their wives are like completely and totally submissive, which Nell was. And when they get a woman that reminds them of their desire to be men, of like their desire to, the fact that they enjoy the company of other men more than women per se, because Sula talked to him in a way that a man would talk to him when she talked to him about his responsibility in life as a man in the world. You know, he decided to cheat. And even so, Sula didn't sleep with men for the purpose of falling in love with them, which is, I think, another reason of like how they kind of cast her and made her be like the villain in the story. The women in the story did in the town, because they said like they could understand the other whores who would sleep with the women, sleep with the men, and then for the prospect of falling in love with them, Sula slept with them once just to like try them out. And so I thought it was a hell of a story about personal autonomy and about like women having the opportunity to choose them and choose to be a woman exclusively. Yeah, Toni she did that. It blew me away. If I could ask Toni a question about Sula, I think I would want to know why she started and ended the story with National Suicide Day. Like we don't have any other references of it throughout the book except for the beginning and the end, the second to last chapter. And the last iteration of Suicide Day that we know about is the largest commemoration of it, because several people end up in a way that they were actually mocking Shadrach, and the thing that he hadn't planned to do anymore, ended up killing themselves on that day by being nosy and expecting that tunnel. It also kind of confirmed the idea that like Sula's resistance to their desire to conform gave them something to hate. Like they didn't, like Toni wrote about how people straightened up and became better parents, became better people in the community because they had something to hate in Sula. And with Sula dead, they no longer had a place to put that hate. And so they had looked and tried to mock Shadrach and end up falling to their deaths as a consequence of their indifference for, you know, him and his commemoration of National Suicide Day. And then I just wondered what was the importance of mentioning Nell's grandmother, Rochelle, at the beginning of the story, besides telling the story, because I know she drew the connection between the way her mother looked on the train and the way that her husband looked at her, Nell's husband looked at her when he left her. But I wonder what other importance that role had in crafting the narrative. And all in all, rating whether I would buy this book again, borrow it, or did not finish it, I absolutely finished it. I'm going to probably read this book several times over. I would absolutely buy it again. I actually want another iteration of the covers. Toni Morrison has a lot of fire covers out there. I want the cursive writing cover, so I'm trying to find that one as well. Absolutely will buy it. And I hope that you enjoyed this video. I'll be posting more like these Book Talk Tuesdays. Make sure you tune in and check out more videos coming down the pike. I have several other things to talk about, several other Toni Morrison books to talk about, as well as some other favorite books I'll be discussing here on Tuesdays on Book Talk Tuesdays. Try to get it done in 10 minutes or less, but if not, we may go a little over sometimes. give me some grace. But then I'll see y'all next time. Love and light. Peace.